Welcome to For the Love of Books, Bees Books Edition, a podcast by North Lanarkshire Libraries.
Hello, this is Pari.
And this is Jenny, and we're here to talk about
Bees Books. We've just come hot on the tails, hot on the
tail
of a tale, a traumatic story. So I still feel a little bit vulnerable, Jenny.
Yes.
How are you feeling today?
I'm okay, actually. Yes, I have not been attacked by birds or anything like that.
By birds that you believed in and support despite evidence. And I have been betrayed, but I still, they're fine. They're okay. I'll still be vulnerable for a certain period of time, and then I'll be back to normal. Yeah.
So a few days ducking out the way of any birds that might
decide to be too comfortable.
Yes, yeah. We're going to use the word poop. Yes.
Yes.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah. I mean, it was after several days, but yes, I'm now mostly okay.
Good.
Yeah, thank you for being with me in this very difficult time. So what are we going to be talking about that is not related to bird poop?
Yeah, so this week we are similar, ... but different.
Oh.
And I'm interested to see how you're going to squeeze a classic into that.
I have the perfect classic for it because I picked it specifically for this theme, but I'm going to show you my other book first. And it was actually I picked two classics.
Oh.
I had forgotten completely. So my first one is called Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. And it's not one of our books, but it is science fiction fantasy. And it was written in the 1970s, so like a modern classic.
It looks well used.
It very well used. I just found it in a Glasgow library, and it's not that many stamps on it. So I don't know who it is that took it before me that used it so well. And there were pages falling out and everything, but I guess it gives the vibe of the historical era that I was trying to do. So it basically is this woman whose name I've completely forgotten, Dana. When she turns 26, she and her husband have just moved into a new house, like their own house. And then she travels back into time. So she's in the US. This is set in the US. Travels back into time to the south of the US at a time when, Dana is black. So she doesn't want to be traveling back in time in the south at a time when being black in the south is not great. So my similar but different in this case is that she is the same person, but when she goes back to 1800 and whatever, she is not considered to be the same person because when she's in 1970 whatever, she's just a human being. When she is in 18 whatever, she is property. So it's dark.
Oh,
this is a dark tale, which is
why
why
I've never heard of it before. You've said it's a classic.
Yes.
Obviously not a...
I think she's American, with maybe, so that's why it's not like as maybe popular in the popular consciousness here. She's also written Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talent, a sequel, which is kind of really popular, but she's written a lot. So it's kind of, I think, mostly science fiction, but not the kind of science fiction that necessarily we think of as like Star Trek or Star Wars, so different kind of science fiction. And she was one of the early kind of writers and is still like around now in terms of her books are still around now. So yeah, well done, Octavia. And my second book is called The Borrowers by Mary Norton. And for those who don't know The Borrowers, they are these little people, very, very, very little people who live under the floorboards of this house. And they are very similar to the humans or the human beings, as they call them, who live upstairs, but different because they fit in a matchbox.
Yes.
And yes.
Oh, that's a proper
So that's why I want to talk about this one first, because I read this one first, but also like it was darker and dystopian, and then I ended it with something wholesome.
Nice. Well, my books, Pari, my first one is Lionheart by Ben Kane, and I've squished this in because, as you know, I quite like my historical fiction, not my kind of like kind of dresses and court kind of a thing, but like usually it's Roman kind of thing. So this is in a similar vein, but it's different in that it is Richard de Lineheart. And
so English.
Yes, and it's about, although it's mostly all in France because that's where everything happened at that time. Because basically we were at war with like everybody, and at that time, quite a bit of France. So it's set then, but it's from the point of view of somebody who kind of joins his army on track type thing. So very similar to the kind of Roman ones that I read, but different because it's
a different empire.
Yes, a different era. And my second one is also a junior book. Kate and the Outcasts by Kieran Larwood. So similar in that it is set in the world of Podkin at the time of Podkin, but different because it's a different area of that world at the time. So which I adored. And I know I keep talking about these and you've not quite read them yet.
You've become a full fangirl of what's his name? Yes.
Right, let's hear about your dark story before we
So and the cover here doesn't really, unless you know what's happening. So there's two black hands on the front cover and a blood red cover as well. Nice font for the title and for the author's name as well. And two sort of black silhouetted hands reaching across each other through chains that I've just noticed. But then on the back, there's chains again that's kind of upside down. So in the front, the chains are white. In the back, the chains are black. And there's two white hands reaching out to each other, which if you've not read the book would make no sense to you at all.
It makes no sense to me.
So when I read the book, I knew that it was going to be dark before I picked it up because I knew that she goes into slavery times. I don't know what it's called, but when like black people in the US were slaves. And it was about like 50 years before even like the sort of whatever it was called, where they abolished slavery, that article happened. So people where she was, she goes to Maryland, which is not deep south, but like in the middle. So you could escape to the north and be free, but she doesn't do that. So I'll tell you why. So so I knew it was going to be dark. And I feel like I've been putting off reading this for a while because I didn't know like if I could handle the darkness. You know, you said last time about how you're like, you tend not to read books, or no, you tend to like be wary of books that get too real and too close to home. And this, I mean, like, sort of, I guess, thankfully for me, is not super close to home because I'm not a black woman in the US. But still, in terms of the conversations and stuff that I've, like, you know, sort of encountered, I know that it is like a dark period of history and it gets really real about that. I'd heard about that as well. So I was like, okay, I have to take a deep breath and prepare myself for many years to be able to read this. But I think the weather helped. It was spring and it was nice. So there was sunshine outside, so I could go into the horrors of slavery in this. So the plot is, birthday, she's turned 26. She and her husband is white. They move to a new house near Los Angeles, I think somewhere in California. And they're just setting up house. And then she suddenly feels faint. And she doesn't understand what's going on. She feels faint. And then her husband like is coming to sort of see what's going on. And then she disappears. She wakes up next to a river. And she's like, and it's like daytime and like the sun is shining and she sees a boy drowning in the river and she's like, oh my God, I like a child. So she's like, and there's a woman who's like shouting, presumably the boy's mother, but the woman doesn't seem to be doing anything. Like she's not going into the river. So Dana, you know, she's like confused about what's happened, but she's like, it's a child. I have to save this child. She jumps into the river, gets the child out, gives him CPR and stuff, and like saves his life. She finds out in the course of, like, I think the mother, she's still like really upset and she's like beating Dana off because she thinks, what are you doing to my baby? She doesn't quite understand what she's seen. The mother is white, the child is white. The father comes in and he has a gun and he points it at Dana and he's like, what are you doing here? Who are you? And stuff, because she's a stranger. She just appeared in this house in this river. And she panics and she's like, no, I just saved his life. But he like aims the gun at her and suddenly she's back. She like she feels faint again, and she's back to where she was. And she tells so she's really like shook. She's like, I don't understand what happened. Did I hallucinate? No, but it felt really real. My fear feels real. I'm wet. I went into the river. I feel real. But she tells her husband this is what happened. And what happens is, so she starts like disappears from one end of the room, and she like appears at the other end of the room. And her husband is like, how did you get there? Because she's only been gone for like a few seconds. So she hadn't been, so he'd gone to help her, she disappeared, and then she reappeared somewhere else. And he's like, what's going on? So she tells him, like, this is what happened, and he doesn't believe her. He thinks that she is like something's,
Had an episode or something.
yeah, something. But then he does see that she's wet, and he does see that she wasn't where she went. So they can't quite understand what's going on. But I think there were some clues in there. I don't know if it was in her first trip or in her second trip that there were clues that she traveled back. She traveled to someplace else. So like she traveled to another place. It didn't feel like Los Angeles. It felt more rural, more country-ish. So she thinks that, okay, this is like I've traveled somewhere. And then I think a few hours go by, maybe. So it's the same day. And she suddenly starts feeling faint again. And she goes back, and it's the same boy, but he's now older.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's in his bedroom. So he set the curtains on fire for whatever reason. And she sees that he's like lost sort of control of it, and he's a bit frightened. And she knows that if the fire takes hold of the room, he'll like burn. So she puts the fire out and she throws the curtains to the ground outside the window and stuff. And then she has a conversation with the boy. She's a bit scared of his father, but it seems to be nighttime. So she's like having a quiet conversation, and she understands that she understands where it is. So she's traveled to Maryland, which is quite far from Los Angeles, where she started from. And the time is also like 150 years before her time. So she doesn't quite understand what's going on. She's talking to him. She finds out his name. And that's when she gets the first clue, which is that she had an ancestor who had the same name as him. Like she'd done like genealogy research and stuff, or her mom had done genealogy research, who was white. And the sort of partner of that, or the person who had the child, was black. So she knows these two names, Rufus and Alice. So she's like, so I'm being sent back in time to save my like ancestor, I guess. She doesn't quite know what's going on, and then like something else happens, I think. And then she's like goes back. So something else happens at that time. She goes back, and then she's talking to her husband about this. She's like, "Look, I'm time traveling," and I'm like, and he's like, he can't believe it, but he knows that she wouldn't just lie. So he finds it difficult to believe, but he sees throughout the course of the book, at one point she takes her husband with her accidentally, and leaves him there again, because she's not in control. She doesn't know when she's going to like go travel back to the past. So it seems that every time this Rufus seems to be really like dancing on the edge of death at all times. So whenever he seems to be in real mortal danger in whatever way, there are different ways throughout his life, is when she's pulled back. But in her time, it's only like a few minutes to a few hours to a few days that she's been away. But there it's been like years and years and stuff. And so this is the premise, which seems like, okay, yeah, that's an interesting thing. But because she's black, and because where she goes, Rufus is a plantation owner. So they have a slave plantation where they are. And she meets slaves. She meets like women and men slaves there. And through the book, you learn. So like a little bit like, what you're talking about, what you'll be talking about with Richard Lionheart in a very different way, that you're being transported to that time and seeing it through the perspective of maybe someone from there. Here we're seeing it from the perspective of someone who's more modern, that, I mean, still in our past, but more modern attitudes in that, Black people are considered humans and not like property. She's going back 150 years and she's seeing the world. So we're learning through her eyes, but she's also there as in she's in danger because she can be mistreated. So because she speaks in a way that the white people are very suspicious about. They're like, you don't speak like a slave. They have a lot of like, words that we wouldn't consider acceptable today. They use that there. And Octavia Butler is black as well. So she was writing about her own, sort of like culture and like ancestral like history and stuff. And she doesn't shy away from showing how like bad it could be. The slave plantation that she ends up in is not one of the really terrible ones, but it's still a slave plantation at the end of the day. So she hears about how to be punished, slaves would be sold to somewhere down south where there is no chance of them escaping alive. There's no chance of them being like just left alone or whatever. They will be worked to their death. So we see a more milder version of it. We don't see it like in the deep south how it was terrible, but we still see it in a way that makes it real. So it's not just statistics in like a history textbook or like a newspaper article or just like, oh yeah, slavery was so bad. We're glad we've moved past that. So it was really, I think it was easy to read in that it moved along really quickly. It's really accessible and stuff. It was very difficult to read in terms of the subject matter. Like I felt like I needed to read it with people around me and not by myself because it just got to, it was really, I don't want to say good because I don't know that I can recommend it to in terms of like, oh, it'll make you feel good. It will not. But in terms of the story and how it's structured and plotted and how you're learning with her, because she doesn't know the rules either, she keeps going back and forth. Like I said, at one point she takes her husband and we figure out, or she figures out, she and her husband, that it's when she is in danger that she's taken back to her real time. So the first time was when a gun was pointed at her and she thought that he was going to shoot her. And like every time, single time, it's like when she's in mortal danger, she's back to, so she can't control it. And the first time, the only time she takes her husband, when she's going back, the husband is too far away to come to her, so he's left there for however many years. She doesn't know. She comes back in their home and like he's not, and she doesn't know how to go back. So it's really interestingly plotted in that way. It's not science fiction, like I said again, in this. There's no like like spaceships and gadgets, time traveling machines and things. It just seems to be this connection. And she meets like Alice. She sees how this child that she saved grows into a man who is a little controlling, a little like he thinks he has good intentions, but he has like he's a product of his time. So he still doesn't see like people as people. Like he's still, he's like this white man on a slave plantation with a lot of black slaves. He has a difficult relationship with his father. It's a kind of book that I don't think I would have picked up otherwise, but I've heard such like good things about her brain, Octavia E. Butler's brain, that I wanted to give it a shot. I wanted to see how, when she was writing in early science fiction, kind of like the genre as we know it is today, how that kind of influenced the kinds of stories that we see now. So it was really interesting, really dark. I would read more of her stuff, but it's not like this. I don't think I can speak of it with love. I don't think you can speak about it like, like, oh my God, I loved this book, because it was really difficult, I think, to see it so up close and personal, but interesting for that reason. And I think other people would really like, if they want to, like, either for the science fiction aspect, for the classic books, book aspect, or historical fiction aspect. So I feel like there's something there for everybody. I'm interested in all three. So it was good for me. But yeah, difficult.
It's also not a huge book.
No, no.
It's not a tiny skinny book, but it's not huge.
No.
So,
and really easy to read. Like I said, the language is quite modern, and it's really sort of, there's no flourishes. You know how some fantasy and all can be really like wordy and it like glorifies in its use and twists of words, which I love as well. We love that. This one is just, it's telling you a story. It's telling you a story through this person's perspective, and you're just like along for the ride, and you're just like reading a report of her life. And they both writers as well, so they're like struggling with that kind of thing. And then when they go back in the past, they're using their skills from the present to like use in the past, but her husband has an easier time because he's white. She has a more difficult time because she's black and she's a woman. So it doesn't like tell you, it doesn't preach about anything, which is what I also like. I think a lot of people would appreciate that it's just telling you as it is. Like, even though it's a made up story, you're still like you're just learning through practice, not practice, but through example that, oh, this feels a bit dark, but yeah, okay, this is just what life was. Okay, that's fine, I guess.
Can we have a bit of a spoiler? Does the
Yeah.
husband go back to
Yes,
their
yeah.
town?
So that's not even like the end. So, but it's after 5 years.
Has
So
he aged that 5 years?
he
and
has,
comes back
he
then?
has, yeah. So she goes back, and she is his only way out of there. So when she goes back, he's moved on to somewhere else. He doesn't live on the plantation anymore, but he keeps in contact with the people. And it was such a different life there. You can't just like text or call.
Yeah.
There were letters that would sometimes the post would go astray. So he would keep writing to the Rufus and his father, and he would like come and try and visit every year. But Rufus also was such a interesting character in that he was like, she had such mixed feelings about him, even when he did like really horrible things. And you could see like how he develops from this child to the role that his father's and mother's influence have on him, and how he becomes this entitled person who thinks that he can control all the people he loves, in air quotes, and he wants to keep close to. So, he lies, and he like makes, or like he's violent sometimes, or he gets other people to do his like violence and just says, oh, I'm just here to look after you, to protect you. So it's a very adult book in that sense, in that it's doesn't shy away from the like the traumas, but also the complexities of feeling. So like I said, it's not the kind of book I would have picked up, but I think I'm really interested to see how she imagines like the world in different ways. So I would read The Parable of the Sower. I think that's more like an alternative world kind of thing, but I might just be making that up. But yeah, so I would recommend this to people who feel like they would be interested in any aspect of what I said, but I know that it's not a book for everybody, and I can understand that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I have a book that is for everybody, in my opinion, which is Uki and Outcasts. I'm saying Uki. I know people will say it differently, but throughout the book I've said Uki rather than Yuki, by the fabulous Kieran Larwood. Also with the wonderful David Wyatt doing the pictures again. So perfect. So we are back in the world of Podkin. We both spoke about Podkin in the past. So it's the same world, it's the same place, but it's set over the wall, over the mountains, basically, to begin with. So there is a map, which I adore. I adore a map. And basically, if you look at the earlier books in this book, you can see where the maps join up, if you see what I mean. So in this story, Podkin's away, kind of, he's just defeated who he's defeated. He's kind of away training with his weapons. So it's set at that time, but just like the Podkin books, the bard is there. So the kind of narrator of the story, he's there telling his apprentice the story of Yuki, while having his own adventure. And this is what I love about these stories. The bard has been developed throughout the stories, as well as learning about Podkin and now Yuki. There's another story going on, and it's really well done. So in the first 3 Podkin books, we kind of know more about who the bard is, where his place in history is, and this is the next step where he's going now.
So that's also a bit of time travel, right? You're going from the time of the bard to back when of time of Podkin and
exactly, and he tells the story so well as well, because basically he's trying to teach the stories to his apprentice so that he can go on and tell the stories, and that's how the stories evolve. And just like in the Podkin books, we kind of meet in the bard's time some of the characters, the people who have been in the stories that he's been telling, and we've read one so far at the end of this book, and there's always that kind of moment where you go yay, because you kind of recognise who that is before they're even introduced, if you know what I mean. So I'll not tell you about his story too much, because that's going to develop over the next 3 Uki books. But Uki himself is basically a rabbit, we should say, for anybody that doesn't know, they're all rabbits, not in a Watership Down way, in a good way.
Yes.
Well,
a little bit of light genocide.
well, yes. So Uki has been born in this other kind of tribe, as it were, but half of his fur is black and half of it is white, right down the middle. So half black, half white. He's kind of been spoken about as a magpie demon. You know, he's had all these kind of nicknames. So when he's grown up, he lives with his mum, and they're kind of on the edge of the village, kind of a thing. So she, I think, makes pots. Apologies, mum, if that's not what you do. So she's kind of needed by the village, but at the same time, almost shunned by the village. You know, it's like, you know, we need your pots, but we don't really need you. And Yuki himself is kind of bullied a bit by the other kids. You know, they're not quite sure what to make of him, and therefore, you know, in the way of all the world, they kind of, you know, make fun of him and kind of bully him. And then something happens. And it kind of goes to the next step, the next level. So him and his mum decide to leave, but he's still young, he's still a young rabbit. They try to leave, something else happens, I'm trying not to give too much away here, and Uki's left on his own. However, there is a kind of magical being that once he takes him under his wing, but that's not quite what happens. But basically, this magical entity helps Uki survive, but gives him a quest, a task to do, which is brilliant because that's what you want. So Podkin had his kind of quest that he was looking for these kind of magical weapons, magical things. Uki's basically asked to go and find these people who have escaped a prison. But they're not people like they know, so they're not bunnies as such. They are something else. And throughout the Podkin books, it's kind of hinted that the world that they live in, there used to be ancients. And from some of the kind of hints, you kind of think that they were human, but you're not quite sure. So they talk about the ears being on the side of their head, some other things, and you kind of think, oh, right, okay, is this a human world that something's happened? And then
because architecture and stuff as well that are in ruins.
Bits and pieces left over, and you know, there's kind of metals and things like that wouldn't necessarily, you know, they wouldn't have the skills to deal with. So you're kind of thinking, is that what's happening here? Are these entities that have been locked away for all these years that have suddenly, you know, managed to escape? What have they been to the ancients? You discovered they weren't the ancients as such. They were something that the ancients created or developed. It's all hints and kind of whispers, but it works because you don't really need to know. You don't really care as such about that, except for how it works in the story. So basically, Yuki's sent out on his own. He's quite a young rabbit. He's not quite sure what to do. And then he comes across basically another two outcasts. So another two rabbits that have kind of been shunned from their tribes. You learn more about that side of the mountain, that there's big kind of plains, and there's different tribes on the plains that are always at war. There's other places that they go. And so Uki now has, I don't want to say special powers, but has knowledge that he didn't have before, and he's stronger than he was, and he has this kind of link with these prisoners, so he kind of senses where they are so they can follow him, even though he's a few days behind them. But he's also aware of somebody behind him, almost chasing after him. So there's quite a lot going on, and just like the Podkin books, it all ties in, it all, like, you know, absolutely makes sense, but there's so many things going on. You just kind of, you're a bit like the Bard's Apprentice. You want to know, but then he'll tell you something else, so you go, no, but wait, I need to know about this, and then he'll go, right, okay, I'll tell you a bit about that, and then, oh no, but wait, I want to go back to this. That's how you feel. You're like, oh, I want to know everything. And it's just so well written, that you kind of you just keep reading because you want to find out what's happening next. You know that this is the first of kind of 3 stories, and you kind of want to know. The character development is superb. You know, you're there with Yuki right at the beginning, and you kind of see he doesn't really know what's going on. He doesn't know much about the ancients. He doesn't know much about these kind of entities. He just knows there was like a kind of sparkly ball in front of him, you know, and then it spoke to him and gave him this task, and then, you know, disappeared. He now knows he's a bit stronger. He knows that he's to chase after these rabbits, and he's got that kind of sense of, I've lost my family now. I'm on my own. I've never really had friends before, so I can do this and I'll do it on my own. But then, of course, you can't. The world is not made like that, any world. You need friends, you need people that you can rely on. But he's not quite, like, he doesn't know how to be a friend because he's never had a friend before. And the other outcasts, who I've forgotten their name, and I do apologise, they're kind of in the same, not the same position as in they've had entities in their head, but they've been outcasts. They've left their warren or their tribe for some reason or another, you know, so they're all slightly lost as well, and it kind of works. Whereas Podkin, it was his brother and sister that kind of started off with him. He already had that. Uki's kind of going first, if you know what I mean, and then other people are joining him. And it's just brilliant. And of course, because if you've read the Podkin books, which you don't really need to read to have read these, but read them, the Bodkin books are kind of set in forests, and you know, they live in warrens. Over the mountains, it's different. Some of them actually live in kind of huts and houses, so they live above ground, and it's like a different.
So it's like different countries in human worlds where they live like different culture, different architecture, foods and whatever.
Oh yeah, so when the Bard and Rue go, because they are travelling that way, and Rue sees suddenly these kind of above ground warrens, he's like, oh, wait a minute, you know, what's happening here? The Bard, of course, has seen it all, you know, because he's an old rabbit, but you know, basically says, you know, everybody has to live to their environment, and you know, out here on the plains they do something different than we would do in the forests, and it was great to see that as well. You know, that the world has got bigger in these books, but again, still similar, still recognisable, but just a wee bit different.
I feel like the trilogy was quite, of the Podkin books, quite self-contained in that, yes, like you said, there are hints of a larger world, but that story ended. But there could still be room for more, which is obviously what this is doing. Do you think people could start reading this trilogy first and then go back and then read the Podkin trilogy? Are there spoilers?
I think there are a few spoilers. I think because the Bard is telling a story, but the Bard has his own story, I think if it was just Yuki, I think it would be fine. But because the Bard's story is throughout all the books, I think, I would say go and read the Podkin books first, but be aware that this is going to be different but similar. Or similar but different. And it's just, I can't wait to read the next one, you know, that way I just can't wait to find out what's going to happen next.
Well, we have them all on our shelves, don't we? So yes, we can go right on ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, so my second book is also kind of like a story within a story. Have you read The Borrowers, Jenny?
I don't think I've read it, but I've seen a couple of adaptations.
Oh, I have never seen. Like, I knew very little about it. I don't know that this is a book that's gained a lot of traction in India. So I'd heard about it in that, you know, when I look at classic children's books or whatever, this is on the list. And I think it's like very British as well. So maybe it's not like a global thing. But it was always in the back of my mind, and this is a copy from our shelf, so I pass it so many times. I've put it on displays. I've just never borrowed it until this theme came along, and I was like, oh, perfect, absolutely perfect. So I've been doing, for those, you know, not been listening consistently, how dare you, but also I've been doing this project throughout the autumn and winter where I've been trying to read one classic book every episode at least. But now that spring is approaching, I'm going to withdraw from that project quite graciously, and I wanted to end with 2 classic books. I've had a great time reading all the classics. And I think with most of them, some of them were a bit okay, but most of them I'm like, okay, I see why you are a classic and why you've stood through, the sands of time and you're still here, even though you were written so long ago and the references might be dated, the kinds of things that they worry about, the issues that concern them may not be in the same way relevant now, but a good story is a good story. And I love the idea of the borrowers about these little people who just live in different sort of houses. Sometimes this one, the family that we see, the Clock family, lives in this big country house, but they live like in humans' big country house, they live under the kitchen because that's the thing that was safest for them. They also talk about, so when we first enter the story, it's this aunt who's telling a story to a niece, I think, like, and she's just saying that, oh, the niece has just lost a needle or something when they're sewing and whatever it is they were doing. And she's like, I'm sure I'd kept it like right here or like a wool or something. And she's like, oh, I see the borrowers have been about again. And then the girl is like, what are you talking about? So she's like, this, whenever things go missing in your house, it's because the borrowers, as they call themselves, are taking these things to use in their own houses. So she obviously wants to hear the story. And she starts with this tale of, she doesn't quite believe it, this woman, because it was a story her younger brother had said to her when he was quite small. And they used to live in India, but he'd been sent to England to recover. He was really ill with something, so he'd been sent to England to recover. So he was quite poorly. He was just stuck in bed all day. So she thinks that maybe he just made this up for entertainment, like because he was so bored and maybe also hallucinating with the fever and stuff. But this is what he claims that he saw, and that's the story that unfolds. So the borrowers, the only borrowers that we see are the Clock family. So there's Ariette Clock, who's the youngest. She's the teenager. She's 13. She's promises she's 14 next June, but so she's 13. And Pod and Homily, which are her parents. So they live together under the kitchen floorboards. The father is the one who ventures out into the house and gets things when nobody's there and nobody's around to use that things that they can use. So they eat similar kinds of food, but because of the height discrepancy, their needs are much like tinier. So they'll get like a ring of onion and they'll put it in the storeroom and they'll make use of that for the rest of the month or something, or like a potato will last them for a really long time. They'll use blotting paper, which used to be a thing back then. I remember it from my school with like ink pens and stuff. It was used to mop up the ink. So they used to steal bits of blotting paper and use it as their carpets because it was great for spills and things. A matchbox is their bed because it was nice, like proper sort of bed sized for them. And all these little tiny little things that they get and they repurpose. And that's why they call themselves the borrowers, because they believe that the humans were put there just for their, to fulfill their needs. They don't really know much about the outside world. There are stories about the borrowers that they used to know. They used to live in different parts of the house, but to them, because they're so small, it might as well be like, so there were the overmantles, and then they're called the clocks because they live behind the grandfather clock, like their passage takes them there. There were the overmantles that were quite snobby and snooty. There were like these under sinks because that's where they used to live. But this was very long ago. A lot of them, a few of them sort of moved away. They don't quite know what happened to them. They just disappeared. But this one family that is still like the kind of a horror story for them had to emigrate because one of them was seen. And so that is the terror that the parents live with. They've not quite told their daughter yet about this story, but they now they live in a badger set, and Homily is like completely like outraged and aghast. She's like, I'm never going to emigrate. I'm never going to live in a stinky badger set without the comforts of home, because she's grown quite accustomed to a certain lifestyle that only living in under the kitchen floorboards could result in. But that's their kind of boogeyman that, like Uncle Henry will have to like emigrate because his daughter was seen by the human and then never seen again. So it's like quite a dark story. So this is the context, the background that we get. But then Ariete, she is feeling quite trapped. There's no child. Imagine growing up in a place where you have nobody except your parents to deal with. You don't even, you think the brown sort of wooden floorboard is your sky. Like that is it. She has like the reprieve of a window. It's like a grating that allows her to see some grass outside, like the real sky outside. So she knows there's a wider world out there. And she always dreams of running through the grass, which is waist high for her because they're tiny, and just feeling the sun on her face. So she really wants to get out there. She hates being cooped up here. So she convinces her father that, so her father, Pod, is the one who goes borrowing, and she convinces him that I want to come with you. Who else will, like, if some, and the mom is like, I guess if something happens to either of us, how will she survive? She'll have to survive. So she goes out on a trip with him, she sort of pleads and cajoles her family, goes out, and she is seen as well. But she was not the first person who was seen. Her father was seen, and he's quite shaken up by this boy because this boy didn't otherwise live in the house. It was just this one old lady and the servants. And this boy is but recuperating in his bed, in this bedroom that used to be empty, that they used to just go into and get stuff. So he was seen, and the boy actually helped him. Like he saw that he was trying to get some sort of cup or something. So he helped him with it. But then the Pod ran away because he's like, I'm just going to pretend that didn't happen. I'm going to be extra careful, but I'm going to pretend. But Ariete is not only seen, but she talks to the boy, and the boy talks to her, and they exchange stories. And then it's like it's a very sort of, because the font, I'm just showing Jenny, is quite like big. It's very much a junior fiction, but it also kind of feels like a fairy tale in terms of, like, it's just a very simple story about this boy and these borrowers and how they come together and how they sort of learn about each other and what happens after, because there is big drama at the end. And there's sequels to this as well. And it just feels like a very old-fashioned story in a really lovely way. It's like, the kind of misconceptions they have about each other and how they figure out how to, like, live in a world that's not built like for either of them, because he's still like 8 and they're tiny. So it's just, yeah, it's just, I understand why this has lived with us and stayed with us for so long. Because I think even like a modern child, I don't know how popular it still is. I don't know how classics, when they fall off the canon and when like new classics replace them, because like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson are like the newer classics, I guess, or classics in making. But I feel like there's a lot in it for adults to appreciate even now, and for children to appreciate, just because you see like the world and the house and your surroundings in a way that you wouldn't otherwise, because it's seen from such a different perspective. Like, you take these things for granted and you're seeing how another person might see them differently. But it's just a fun story at the end of the day, I think. Like, even without all the kinds of things that could be, it opens up your imagination to like the world as it could be for somebody else, which I think is always nice. And it's, yeah, I felt very like, oh my God, this was so wholesome, even though there were like moments of great danger and stuff. And in the end, it's quite a scary ending, because it leaves room open for future sequels, which I will also definitely be reading, maybe in the next autumn winter project. But I'm glad that I read this, and it's much easier to recommend than Kindred, because even though I really like sort of liked spending time with Kindred, it's this one I feel like is for everybody, for adults and for children combined. So I would recommend it for you as well, Jenny, and I would be looking for the adaptations. I remember when I was a kid, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. That was quite like, I used to love that movie because it was similar, right? Like they're so huge. I mean, they're normal sized, I guess, and they like encounter the world in a specific way. But when they become tiny, they're looking at the world with a whole new perspective. So I would like to see how it's done, because even the descriptions in the book are so charming. Like, charming is the word that you can, and there are illustrations as well in like of the different places and how you like here there's the tea set and these three borrowers borrowing cake. They don't like to be called thieves because they are not thieves, which also adds to the helping you picture how they live and where they are. So yes, really recommend.
Sure, the version I've seen had Ian Holm, who might not mean anything to you, as the father, and I absolutely adored it.
Oh, amazing! Was it a movie?
Yes, no, possibly.
Oh, a TV
I think it was
series.
I feel as if it wasn't just the first book. I feel as if
Yes,
there was more.
Yeah.
I think a few years ago they maybe did another version of it that was just a movie type thing. But I'm sure the Ian Holm one was it might not even be Ian Holm about the line. Was more of a kind of a series. And I'd like that. I loved the kind of way that everything was repurposed and like, you know, for us something like a paperclip that we would just, you know, if it dropped down the back of the chair you wouldn't even go and find it. How they repurposed it for something, and like that, how a grown up, a child, but you know, a human being interacted with them, and how, you know, a child will still see that as something magical, whereas you know, you can imagine an adult, it would probably in their head see a mouse, or something, wouldn't see
and get very scared.
Exactly.
Which is the conflict in this. No, it was lovely. Were you charmed by?
Yes, and charming's a perfect word for that kind of you know, it's very much that kind of Charlotte's Web type thing, that you know, it's easy and comfortable, and you know that it's like a warm blanket.
You know nothing too bad is going to happen.
And you're just kind of taken away, and it doesn't matter how old you are. You're taken away.
It's timeless, I think. It's because it's just a good story. So it doesn't, you know, like good stories are good regardless of when you encounter them. But I'm glad I did. I'm glad I read it.
Good. Well, my last book, or my second book, is Lionheart by Ben Kane. It's the first in the trilogy. I already have the second one out because I really enjoyed it. And as I say, it's similar in its way to the kind of Simon Scarrow books that I read, the Con Golden books, and that it's kind of set in olden times. You're learning about that time from the view of somebody who's not a big figure of the time, who's kind of, you know, a soldier or whatever. And this, yes, Richard Lionheart's very much in it, quite a lot, but it's from the view of Berdia. So back in the day, and we're at 1179, Henry II is the King of England and Wales, Ireland, Normandy, Brittany and Aquitaine. And basically he has three legitimate sons and one not so. And the oldest son, who I think is called Henry, is out and about in France. Richard, I think, is the youngest son, out and about doing his thing. He's the Duke of something at that time. And then there's a middle son who might be called Geoffrey. I can't remember. He wasn't a big figure in the story. Geoffrey. I might be lying. Anyway, and basically at that time, there was unrest in Ireland, and it was common for people to take the sons of their enemy, not as hostages, but they were hostages, to kind of take them and let them kind of grow up in the household. And it meant you had a kind of hold. You hear it a lot in like Game of Thrones and things like that they would take, you know, the sons just to kind of, you know, say, we've got you now, teach them their ways in the hope that, you know, they wouldn't rebel.
And also make sure the family stays in control, right? Because I have your son.
Yes, you're not going to do anything, you know, bad. So it was quite common. So Berdia, his father's quite a big deal, and so he's taken captive, and he basically is given a kind of, I don't want to say British or English, because the time the book was written, quite a lot, it was like Normans and Saxons. It was all kind of, it's not a bit of history I'm overly familiar with, but there was different influences on the word at the time. You know, there was very much kind of French influence. A lot of our words now, you know, kind of date back from that time. So he's given a name that they're more comfortable with, shall we say, and because he's got red hair, he's called Rufus, and basically, he's now known as Rufus. But inside, is he still Fergia, that kind of thing. So he's taken captive. I think he's about 18, 19 at the time. Has a quite bad crossing to get to where he's going, and he's put in this household of a large family at the time. The Declares, I want to say, but I might be lying again. And basically he's kind of put in prison. He's kind of kicked about a wee bit and put in prison because the person, the knight in charge of taking him, is kind of like, you're just scum, I'm not really bothered. But as time goes on, he kind of becomes part of the household. He talks to the family's daughter, and at one point Richard, the Duke of wherever he is at the time, comes along, and he manages to kind of save his life, sort of a thing, in the way it happens. So he becomes part of that world then. And not to give too much away, basically we see him, I think this spans maybe 10 years, becoming more in with Duke Richard is at that point, not Prince or King. That does happen, but he becomes part of, like, he's a squire at one point, helping the knights and all that kind of stuff, and he ends up in positions where he's helping things happen that did happen historically. It was just like the kind of Simon's Guide, what you're learning about that time in history. This, to me, this kind of time was kind of Robin Hood time. And that's all I can really think about. So it was nice kind of learning what was happening in the bigger picture.
So you were not familiar with this history?
No, not at all. No, it's not like ancient Rome, or like Rome, that you kind of, I had a wee bit of a taste of, and kind of, this is completely just thrown in.
So in school you're taught Scottish history, not English history?
Yes, yes, it's more that kind of a thing. You're kind of, aware, but for me history was kind of crop rotations and things like that. We didn't do anything particularly exciting. But what we learn from this story is that the king is getting old, and his oldest son is going to become king, but there is a lot of intrigue and politics between the three brothers, because basically it's not always the firstborn that really should be king. It doesn't have some of the skills perhaps that other people have. Other people might be out fighting for land and stuff, whereas the oldest son's just kind of, he hasn't seen battle, he hasn't kind of seen that kind of side, and people are like, well, wait a minute, we'd rather have a king who we know would fight for it, that kind of thing. So you're seeing all that. You're seeing like the different parts of France where their allegiances lie, because obviously there is a king of France at that time, but there's kind of other things happening. It's the kind of stuff that you like, all the kind of politics and the intrigue and things like that. But at the basis of this, there was the story of Rufus and how his, like, obviously to begin with, he's like, I'm going to be going back to Ireland and I'm going to be fighting these evil people and all that kind of stuff. But as he gets to know Richard, he's kind of like, well, actually, this guy could tell me to do anything and I would do it, because he's so charismatic. He's so, you see his allegiance change and kind of thing. So at the end of this book, as I say, I think it's about 10 years, and Richard has just basically become king. His father's died, there's all sorts of things that have happened, but we're seeing this from Rufus's point of view. There's also another character that occasionally has a chapter to themselves, who I've completely forgotten the name of, who is an actual historical character. So whereas Rufus is kind of a made up amalgam of various people, this other guy is not, and I'm very quickly trying to find out if I can find out what his name is. There is a map. There's in fact two maps. So there's a map of like the bottom of Britain at the time and the top of France, and then there's like a bigger map of France, because most of the action happens there for the story. And the other character I'm talking about, William Marshall. So William Marshall was a knight in the King's. There's a special word for it, but I'm just going to say it's not an army as such, but and he was like a proper true knight, very honourable, very much wanting to see, the king becoming. He started out, I think, the young kings, so the next in lines, entourage, and he sees that he's getting influenced by other people, and he's wanting to do right by him. He's a wee bit older than the other knights. He's been around a wee bit more. He's like one of the greatest fighters of his time, and he was a true person. Obviously, Ben Kane, the author's taken him and kind of given him a bit of story. So occasionally he appears, and in real life, he actually served with all the kings, even beyond Richard. He was there for all of it. I'm glad that these stories are not from his point of view all the time. I'm glad we're seeing it from somebody lower down to begin with, but I'm interested in his story, and I think this has made me think I'm actually going to find out more about him after I've read these, in case of any spoilers, but to find out more about how he managed in a time when people were getting killed all the time, not just in battle, but by the intrigue, by you serve this
disease, I'm sure.
but you serve this king, and now I'm king, you're out the door. He was such an honourable person that he was kind of able to move around. He wasn't a spy for anybody or anything, but he could see things were going the wrong way, and perhaps if he was to do a wee nudge here, maybe it would be back on track. So not spying and not like being traitorous, but just kind of nudging things along, and it didn't always work out how he thought it might, but it did always work out. But just as I say, I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning about a bit of history where I didn't know anything about. Obviously I know about Robin Hood and one of the, because I think there's actually 4 sons, I think I was telling a lie, John, who became Prince John. He's kind of like at the side at the moment. I don't know if he's going to come into it more. But we see how all the brothers are kind of fighting, and how the king is his favourite, and then it kind of went somewhere, that kind of a thing. So I know John and I know the story of Robin Hood, but it's nice to see the historical actual side of it. And because it's set in France as well, that this one was, you're kind of seeing that side, and how basically they seem to just like travel from like bit to other bit of France, battling people, because they're kind of rebelling against something, and it's like the Forth Road Bridge. When they get round to the beginning again, they have to do it all again because other people are rebelling, and the King of France is kind of like whispering here, and making promises here, and not always keeping his promises, shall we say, to anybody. And there's somebody here who's always in this person's ear, saying they're doing this, but actually, they've got their own interests. Whereas Ferdia, on the kind of, he's firmly in King Richard's camp, but he's sort of on the outskirts, because can kind of see as well what's happening. If you did this, it's the kind of story that could be like a fantasy story, if you know what I mean. If you took out all the French names and put in weird, wonderful names, it's all castles and knights and all that kind of stuff, and just spot on for me. And I don't know why I've not read them before, if that makes sense. So I'm glad this theme came up, because I don't think I would have got round to these, if you know what I mean. I would have stuck to my Roman times, rather than kind of dipping in.
So do you know how the story ends in real, like in history?
I know that Richard did become king. I do know that Richard the Lionheart became king of wherever.
But you don't know what
happened. I don't really know around it, if you know what I mean. And the only reason I know like it's Robin Hood times is because they kind of mention like Prince John and Sherwood at one point, because I think he's been kind of pushed out the way by giving, you can have this part of, because basically they just parcelled out bits of England and Wales however they wanted. It's like there was all these big families, but if something happened and they went out of favour, it's like, all right, okay, this is now yours. They're bumped out and this is now yours. So that I kind of know a little bit about that, but not enough to have written a book, not enough to kind of know exactly what's what.
Yeah, I
Um,
feel like so in the Robin Hood Disney movie, I know Richard the Lionheart was the lion. I don't know what role he played. And I feel like that's my knowledge in general because
yes.
obviously we didn't learn about English history or Scottish history or British history at all. Maybe the Industrial Revolution, but only how that affected us in India. So it's only all the stuff that in the last 10 years that I've been here is when I've like subsumed. And there's references in other books and other media. Like I quite like watching historical fiction and stuff, especially the modern reinterpretations of like these times. So there'll be like these side characters or there'll be references to them. So I feel like at some point I did know what happened to Richard, but I don't remember at all. Like I feel because I've also read a book by David Mitchell, which was about the kings and queens of England. So I definitely did know, like I listened to it, I was entertained by it, and I know what happened to him, but it's memory that's completely lost. So would you recommend this book then to people who might not be really, like I am interested in history, but to someone who's not interested in history, but it's just a good story? So the names and the places may as well be fantastical.
Yes,
They don't know any French, they don't know any English.
I think if you're into history, you're not into all the history. There's been a lot of history in Paris, but
And some of it I'm
yes,
just not interested in.
yes, but if you are somebody who perhaps would like to dip their toe into fantasy,
Yeah.
but has never done it, reading something like this brings that kind of medieval knights in shining armor, honor, all that kind of stuff. It kind of gives you that. But if you're not into historical fiction at all, but you like Robin Hood, or you like something, you like the idea, it's a great way as well. If you want to learn but without learning, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's one of those stories that kind of works. And like Fergus or Rufus, I should say, or Ferdia, because we're seeing it from his point of view, yes, there's big thing happening in the world. There's people, kings and people like that trying to do things, but he's got his own, enemies himself. One of the knights is the knight that brought him over from Ireland and doesn't like him, is now in Richard's kind of entourage. I can't remember the proper word, sorry. And so he's like, more worried about that than actually going into battle against somebody else, because this knight might be at the back of him or at the side of him, and he doesn't like him. So again, a wee nudge, but a physical nudge this time into the arms of some like person.
Broadsword.
Exactly. So that's what I like. I like that there's big things going on.
Yeah.
Just like in the Simon Scarrow books, there's big things going on. They're going to Britain at the time, when things were happening. They're going to Germanica and places like that. But their story is their story, if you know what I mean. So yes, like us, there's big things going on in the world, but we've got our own priorities, our own thing happening.
Yeah.
That's what I like about them.
I suppose on the flip side as well, like you said, for those who want to give fantasy a shot, could dip their toes in with this. Like on the flip side, those who might be like really love things like Game of Thrones. I'm using that as an example because I know he used a lot of English history, maybe Scottish history, British history as influences for his plots and characters and things. I'm sure other writers have done that as well. So if you've enjoyed that kind of, political intrigue, character development sort of thing, it might be quite enjoyable to read something that's based on historical, like real history.
Absolutely.
And then you can maybe compare it in the opposite way, like, oh, this was very similar to like, this Game of Thrones moment, or this, like, even if you watched the TV series.
Yeah.
So that might be a good kind of entry point
No,
into it as
absolutely.
well.
But at the end of the day, it's just one of those kind of like adventure stories, and there's no kind of, there's a bit of romance, but it's not really, it's just sidelined. It's more just kind of.
It's a part of the story rather than being the whole story's about that,
Exactly.
which I don't mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know that I would read some of the stuff that's out just now about Henry VIII and his wives, just because I'm not really interested in that, if you know what I mean, because they always seem to be more from the wife's side of the story, whereas this Yeah, good kind of action adventure,
Yeah.
but with swords.
Yeah. That sounds good. So what are we going to be talking about next time?
Well, we are taking a slight break. We are
Mhm.
taking an episode break
Mhm.
from B to give her a rest as well as ourselves.
Yes. We need some space.
We do. But when we come back, our
Yes.
theme will be take a break.
Oh,
Yes.
how fortuitous.
Yes. So P's decided if she's having a holiday as well,
Lovely.
yes,
Yeah,
she'd
so-
like us to discuss take a break.
Well, I hope you have a break as well, wherever in the
Yeah.
world you are. I think we could all do with some more breaks guiltlessly. I'll
Yes.
keep saying this until everybody believes it. But until then, we'll see you again next time.
Bye.